this installation, Charlie Don't Surf from 1997. Again, many aspects of Cattelan's work come in one sculpture, are concentrated here. Very early, actually, in his work, 1997. The first thing I would mention here is the notion of theatrality that Maurizio Cattelan always pays attention to. The way the work interacts with space and the way the perception of the viewers are guided by the way Cattelan is actually installing the work. Here you enter a room where you will meet only one object at the end of the room. You have to walk towards the sculpture. The sculpture from the back is a child wearing a hoodie, sitting at a school desk. This path between the door of the room and the child is deliberate. When you come to the child himself, you go around and then you discover what's happening. The two hands of the child are nailed to the desk with pencils. Again, we go back to the notion of crucifixion that we have seen earlier in the exhibition. You have a child crucified on a desk. That brings us to the relationship that I was suggesting earlier about this notion of childhood. Maurizio Cattelan himself as someone who grew up almost refusing to become an adult, almost refusing the compromise that we make when we become adult, almost refusing the loss of innocence that we experience when we become adult, assuming responsibilities, almost refusing the contradiction that we have when we become adults. Of course, this experience to be crucified on a desk might be the experience that many of us have experienced at school. How education, the structure of education, also maybe belongs to the structure of power, which is at the center of Cattelan's work. Power imposed on child, power through which children transition towards the world of adult. But again, very importantly, what makes this work, besides the content, the relationship to childhood, the relationship to violence made to children, is the theater suggested by Cattelan. I mentioned earlier that Cattelan performs the building, performs the architecture. And here you have a perfect example of how it works. Even if it's a fixed object, it's an object like Madame Tussaud. When you go to the Wax Museum, when you see these characters, all the self-portrait we see here by Cattelan could belong actually to a Madame Tussaud museum. But the darkness of what's happening when you turn the corner around the child, this surprise, this contrast between pain and pleasure, between what's playful and what is tearful, between the smile and the tears, constitute the dynamic, the aesthetic dynamic in Maurizio Cattelan's work. I was mentioning earlier Maurizio Cattelan's relationship with childhood, or this idea that maybe Maurizio Cattelan, as he portrays himself so often as an adult scaled as a child, might be a child who's refusing to grow up or refusing the world of adults. The work that we have here goes exactly in this direction. This child here, drumming, comes from a very specific movie called The Tin Drum. The Tin Drum is a movie directed by Volker Scholendorf from a novel by Günter Grass. This film depicts the life of Oskar. Oskar is a child who lives in Germany, mid-20th century, during the rise of the Third Reich. This child, Oskar, witnessing the world of adult, witnessing history in the making, refuses to be part of it, refuses to become an adult, refuses the compromise made by adult. The way Oscar manifests this refusal, the world of adult, is by drumming. He drums and he screams. He screams with such an high pitch that the windows, all the glass breaks around him, and he drums as a sign of resistance. When you confront this work here, and the work here actually itself is directly lifted from the movie. The drum, the tin drum that he's playing, is exactly the same that the one that Oscar uses in the film. When you confront this work here with Novecento here, where you have Italy, the rise of fascism in Italy, the rise of fascism in Germany, you have a very clear view of the values, the history that Maurizio Cattelan is warning us about. He's not warning us about the past. He's warning us about a history which seems to refuse to pass. As much as he's refusing to become an adult, this history, the reality represented by the rise of fascism, seems to be a political reality that is refusing to pass. And that's at the very center of Maurizio Cattelan's work. I would even notice that the detail of his work brings us back to this history. Beside the drum, which is exactly the same, I mean, the difference is that this little child, or Oscar, is dressed like a 21st century child. He's wearing Adidas. That's a detail. Adidas was created by Adolf Hassler. Adi for Adolf, Hassler, as Adidas. And it's known history that the Hassler brothers, Adolf and Rudolf Hassler, were active members of Nazi Germany. So when you look at this work, every symbol, every iconic symbol here contribute to tell a story. And as Maurizio Cattelan does very often, the first impact you have is this empathy for the child. Put a smile on your face until you fully unpack and understand the historical warning that this work is whispering, Sussurro, in our ear. A handful of works in Maurizio Cattelan's career have generated significant amount of controversy. The one behind us right now, La Nona Ora, this no man's time between life and martyrdom of Christ, is one of these works. Again, Maurizio Cattelan is creating an icon, because this work became an icon when it was produced in 1999. A very controversial icon, though. Because of this work, Maurizio Cattelan was attacked, accused of heresy. He was accused of being anti-clerical artist. But it was in 1999, so 26 years from now. A few things here. What's amazing to me is that the work is still relevant today. Of course, the image, the character at play, in this play, if we want to call it a play, if we want to call it a fixed performance, is Pope John Paul II. John Paul II, of course, is the icon, the figure of sainthood, the human pope, the humanitarian pope. Here, in spite of his spiritual power, he is vulnerable, he's on the ground, he's been hit by a meteorite. He's not down, he's still hanging to his crucifix. Actually, when we look at the work, the face is actually a face of focus and dignity. There's nothing caricatural about the way John Paul II is depicted here. His left shoulder is not on the ground. He's suspended. He's suspended not in time, he's suspended in an effort to stay up. And this is, for me, an attitude, like many works of Maurizio Cattelan, of resistance. In the world we live in right now, in 2025, I think the figure of the Pope has really changed over the last few years in a world which is increasingly spinning in crisis down the rabbit hole of historical violence, of maybe the repetition of a history that Maurizio is again whispering in our ears. What happened mid-20th century is happening again. Is our little boy drumming, warning us about something? Is Novecento warning us about the danger of the absolute race for progress, in spite of maybe civil right? Here we have a character, the figure of the Pope today in this world that has changed might be very different. We know that the controversy, the scandals that have surrounded Vatican and the Catholic Church over the years. But here we have an image of a figure of authority. And in this world where many of our leaders come under question for integrity, maybe La Nonna Ora here is signaling something else. That through this figure, which is not an innocent figure, the notion of dignity, spiritual dignity, moral dignity, still have hope. The fact that this Pope is still hanging on, for me, is a positive sign. It's not a charged portrait. It's not a caricature. Of course, as every Maurizio Cattelan's work, we're never far from that. We're never far from the shock. We're never far from an image that might force us to question preconceived truth. But that's the value of what a real work of art, a true work of art, does to us. Here in the villa bathroom, the pink bathroom, we are also facing a work which is already a recurring topic in Maurizio Cattelan's work. A self-portrait, of course, self-inflicted death. Remember the little scroll, bidi, 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 bidoo. The tribute to Francesca Woodman, the double self-death portrait. And here we have a self-portrait of Maurizio Cattelan hanging. It's not the first time that he used hanging as a motif in the work. A few years ago, he made a very controversial work in Milan, I believe, where a group of children were hanging from trees. The work created huge controversy. Of course, the work was not about an invitation for violence and brutality to children, but far from that, it was more a reflection on the brutality of war, of adult, a reflection on what happened when we inflict pain to a body which is not ours. Here, you have, again, a self-portrait of Maurizio Cattelan, always treated the same way, in this kind of strange, ambiguous space between being a child and being an adult. Deliberately, Maurizio Cattelan didn't want us to see the face. He's almost forcing us, like with the work Charlie Don't Surf, the child crucified on the desk, to make the effort to go and see what is actually unspeakable, unbearable, to see the corpse. So you have to move in, you have to go around, and you have to go under the little wall to see the face of the quote-unquote the victim. Actually, if you calibrate your visit well, you can actually see the face of Maurizio Cattelan reflected in the window itself. I'm just saying that to stress how much this notion of theatrality, of stage theatrality, appears in Maurizio Cattelan's work. And it's always double-edged. It's always ambiguous work, because of course it's a corpse hanging, and you can see, even in the details of the body, how the body doesn't lie. The body carries the traces of what might lead to this dramatic event. Of course, the face seems to be almost as a contradiction, a state of serenity. But if you look at the fingers of this work, they are eaten, they are eaten away, like a sign of self-doubt, anxiety, eventually depression. The contradiction here is that the character hanging here is holding a bouquet of fresh flowers. And they are real flowers. Actually, we are changing the flowers every week. So you have the contradiction here of a corpse, a dead corpse, but still maybe a sign of hope, or just this idea of creating a contrast. The natural quality, the beauty, the freshness, the livelihood of the flower in the hand of a body that will never see life over again. I also always stress this notion of suspension in Maurizio Cattelan's work. The first work you saw, Novecento, is a suspended horse. You have the suspended self-portrait up the stairs. And here again, you have suspended time with La Nonna Ora and the suspended body of the Pope. Maurizio always brings us in a state of suspension. When he plays with scale, our relationship with reality, with what's real, is suspended. So here again, you have a moment of suspension between life and death, between what put a smile on your face and what will bring tears to your eyes.